Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our attendees joining us today for this latest Data Science Central webinar. This is Bill Voorhees, your host. I'm the Editorial Director with Data Science Central and also Chief Data Scientist for Data Magnum. Now, I'd like to start off our event today by thanking Trifeactive for sponsoring today's event. Trifeactive is a longtime supporter of the Data Science Central community, and we're honored to have them sponsoring our event today. Now, past webinars are available on demand at datasciencecentral.com, and if you haven't had an opportunity to view them, I encourage you to take a look. They provide very useful insight into a wide variety of topics of interest to our data science community. So today's webinar is entitled The State of Data Preparation in 2018, and that'll be presented by Trifactive. Now, before we begin, I'd like to briefly review the format for today's webinar. Today's event will be an hour long. We have two presenters who I'll introduce in just a minute. There'll be 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A following the presentation, and this event is being recorded and will be available on datasciencecentral.com later this afternoon following today's live event. And I'd also like to encourage our attendees to provide questions throughout the presentation, as we'll be reviewing and presenting them on your behalf during the Q&A portion of today's event. Well, I'm very pleased to introduce today's speakers, Howard Dresner with Dresner Advisory Service and Will Davis with Trifactive. Now, Howard is the founder and Chief Research Officer at Dresner Advisory Services and is one of the foremost thought leaders in business intelligence and performance management, having coined the term business intelligence in 1989. He has published 2 books on the subject, The Performance Management Revolution, Business Results Through Insight and Action, and Profiles in Performance, Business Intelligence Journeys and Roadmap for Change. Now, Will is Director of Product Marketing at Trifactive. He drives go-to-market and product marketing efforts. He spent the past 8 years managing the marketing initiatives for several high-growth data companies, including Good Data, Greenplum, and ClearStory Data. Will develops and executes Trifactive's marketing and content strategies to rapidly expand business growth and brand awareness. So Howard, Will, thanks for being with us today. We're looking forward to your presentation. You know, over the past few years, data preparation has emerged as a standalone category within data management and analytics, a technology category that originated out of the joint research across UC Berkeley and Stanford. It's now recognized as a critical technology by end users, organizations, and industry analysts alike. Data prep also evolved tremendously since that category first emerged in 2015. So what's new? How far have we come? Where are we headed in the future? So today's Data Science Central webinar will provide an overview of the data prep market. In today's session, Howard will review findings from his 2018 Wisdom of the Crowds market study on data preparation compiled from end user responses. Also in today's webinar, we'll cover how data preparation is being utilized within organizations, what users and departments utilize data prep, what are the most common critical features of data preparation technologies, differences between traditional ETL technologies and this new generation of data preparation tools. So Will, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. You can begin as soon as you're ready to go.
All right. Thanks, Bill. Appreciate that introduction. In today's webcast, we're going to be talking about the state of data preparation in 2018. As Bill mentioned, really happy to have Howard Dresner, one of the thought leaders in the business intelligence and analytics space, and actually the independent analyst that kicked off research of data preparation as a standalone independent category. And then Will Davis here, I'll discuss sort of what we're seeing as a vendor at Trifactive within data preparation, and also clear up a lot of the differences between data preparation and ETL that we get asked a ton from prospects and people that are interested in the technology. So jumping to the agenda, Howard's going to review his research. So he does a research study every year. It's called a Wisdom of the Crowds market study, focusing on end user data preparation, and he'll share some of the output of that research. One important aspect of his research is that this is done with end users of these technologies. So it's not a large vendor survey or not large survey of buyers. It's actual end users, which is really valuable and show trends in how users view data preparation as a critical technology, what different groups within organizations are leveraging it, how frequently they're using it, and also talk about other aspects such as ecosystem, and then end with the vendor evaluation that was part of the survey. Then at the end there, I'll talk about mainly around the differences between ETL and these new data preparation technologies, which Trifactive is one of them, and then we can leave a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. So just jumping in, I have a quick 2 slides before I pass to Howard, just to give you a background on what data preparation is, and then we can jump into the research. So, as Bill mentioned in his overview, the genesis of Trifactive and the data preparation space came about around research that was happening between Stanford and UC Berkeley, and the combination of Jill Hellerstein, who's a professor at UC Berkeley, Jeffrey Here, who's a professor at University of Stanford, and also their PhD student, Sean Candell, and found out that in servicing companies and doing a survey that 80% of the time that is spent on analytics is spent on data preparation. So what we mean by data preparation is getting access to data, cleaning it, structuring it, joining it together, maybe doing some calculations or aggregations on that data to then push it downstream to some sort of analysis or visualization or machine learning technology. And so over the past few years, it's been widely recognized that data preparation is the biggest barrier to any sort of output or success in analytics projects. You actually have a quote here from former chief data scientist in the Obama administration, DJ Patel, where he says it's impossible to overstress this. 80% of the work in any data project is spent cleaning the data. So it's what we see as the biggest opportunity to bring more efficiency and improve success of analytics is bringing a new approach to how data is prepared prior to being leveraged downstream. And so if you look at the workflow, data preparation technologies sit between data platforms or raw data, diverse data that lives in different systems, and the downstream analytics and consumption that happens with the data. So these are typically a process that the data platforms live within IT, and the analytics and consumption live within the business people. And some of the processes that we view as part of the activities of data preparation revolve around discovering the data, structuring it, cleaning it, enriching it, so bringing disparate data sources together, validating that everything looks good, and then publishing it to that system or analytics platform that you're leveraging downstream. So hopefully that gives you a little background on what we'll be covering over the next 40 minutes. And then with that, I will pass to Howard to further review his latest research.
Great. Thanks very much, Will. And hello, everybody, and welcome. Before we get started, let me just share a couple of things with you. First of all, as Will mentioned, we publish independent, objective research on the industry. We will publish 16 major reports this year, and we do it through primary research. We collect the data ourselves twice per year, and that supports all of the research reports that we publish. And for end-user data preparation, we started collecting data and reporting on that 4 years ago. So this is the 4th year that we've been reporting on this. We try to get into topics relatively early so we can see where they go. They sort of start off as experiments, and then we go from there. And end-user data preparation is one of those that has been it's been on fire. It's been one of the hottest topics that we track across all those topics that we publish research on. And it's also worth noting that users have always engaged in end-user data preparation, just they haven't had very good tools to do it. They've used whatever was at hand, whether it was a 4GL tool or a business intelligence tool or a spreadsheet, none of which are especially apt at supporting that sort of activity. So I'm going to take you through some of the research and some of the analyses from our most recent report on end-user data preparation. So first of all, this eye chart that I'm presenting to you, and don't look at it too closely, you might go blind, but basically we track a whole host of different technologies each year. We expand the number that we track. So last year we tracked 33. This year we're expanding it to, I believe, 36 different technologies just to see where they rate in the user's estimation as to how important they are, what sort of a priority they are. And you can see just above the halfway point or the midpoint, end user data preparation and blending. So that's one that has been consistently rising year after year, and I'll get into some details. Of course, the sort of the meat and potatoes of this industry remain reporting and dashboards, visualization, self-service, which is interesting because end user data preparation is another form of end user self-service. So end user self-service is a revolution, if you will, in many ways, where the users are empowered to do more for themselves, by themselves, and end user data preparation very much plays into that theme or supports that theme. So moving on, so here we start to see the 4 years worth of data, which is very cool because you can start to discern real trends after you have a few years of data. And here we just ask the users, how important is this notion of end user data preparation? And so we look at percentages on the left in terms of how many think it's critical versus very important and so forth. And on the right, we calculated a weighted mean. And what's notable is that if you look at on the right, the weighted mean is well above a 3.5. It's really at about a 4.0, which across all of the topics that we cover, that is extraordinarily high. It's much higher than any of the topics that you hear about on a daily basis, whether it's big data or data visualization or advanced and predictive analytics or cloud. Or this is much, much higher, and its importance is in fact growing as per those users within our community that we survey. So if we break it down and take a look by function, it does seem no surprise that end user data preparation is sort of a front office activity. In other words, the business users are the ones that are most actively clamoring for this capability or see the most value in it, and are the ones that are on the front lines engaging with data on a day in and day out basis, trying to support the business. So you see that on the far left, you have sales and marketing who say that end user data preparation is absolutely critical, and virtually all of them, so 80% say it's critical. And R&D, no surprise, because R&D is always actively involved whenever you have a new technology that's emerging within the organization. So it's not a surprise that you would see them. It's interesting to see executive management, however. So depending on how they define themselves by executive management, they might not be at the C level, but they might be at the SVP or certainly at the VP level. And so there certainly is a great deal of currency associated with end user data preparation, once again within the front office. Conversely, the other functions certainly see value in this, by the way. The difference between sales and marketing and finance, although it is significant, finance is still well above a 3.75 on that weighted mean. So there's certainly value there too. It's just that their approach might be somewhat different. And then if we look at it by organization size, once again, all organizations of all sizes see value in this, but you see it does go up as you get to larger organizations, and that's simply because larger organizations in many cases are dealing with many more data sources, and certainly they have a lot more users that they're dealing with. So for them, it's a somewhat more pressing problem, but certainly smaller and mid-sized organizations are definitely feeling the pain and definitely feel the need for end-user data preparation capabilities. Okay, so change gears a little bit. So when we asked them, back in 2015, we said, basically, how's it going? How are you folks doing as it relates to preparing data for analysis? And these numbers are actually relatively low. So you can see that there was definitely a pent-up need. You can see most people said that it was their attempt to prepare data was somewhat effective. Only a very small percentage back then said it was highly effective. And as you go to the right to 2016, 2017, we start to see improvement. It is actually improving. And of course, we didn't ask them why it's improving. Next year, we probably should. But my guess is that they're using more advanced tools to engage in data preparation. And if you've ever used a spreadsheet versus a modern end-user data preparation tool, you could see why that would be the case. The other thing that's worth noting is the frequency of end user data preparation. And what I would encourage you to look at are really the two bottom bars, the constantly and the frequently. So the frequency is actually increasing when you look at those two. And you can see if you look at those top bars where it says rarely or never, those numbers are definitely decreasing when you look from 2015 across to 2016 and all the way across to 2018. So users are engaging much more so with the data than ever before. And as a result, well, to Will's point earlier, we want them spending less time actually preparing the data and more time actually analyzing the data, because that's where the real value is at the end of the day, actually deriving insights from the data. So we do want to make it as straightforward and as simple as possible to get them out of prep and get them into analysis. And then we take a look at frequency by function once again. Sales and marketing is number one, but you see finance is number two in terms of frequency. And it's not a surprise. Finance spend their time in the numbers. Of course, they're dealing predominantly with internal sources, much more so than you would see with sales and the marketing departments. And then this is really interesting to me, and maybe this will come up in the Q&A as well. When we ask folks about third-party data, it says to me, if you look once again at the numbers here, most folks are dealing with internal data. Certainly some are dealing with external data, and when you look at it by function, the external or the more externally focused users or roles, obviously these numbers would be much higher. But at the aggregate level, you can see that most folks in the organization on average are dealing with internal data. They're not dealing with external data. Okay, let's take a look for a moment at what the features are that really matter. And these are all the features that we test. The most important features are on the bottom. So these have to do with usability. And of course, end user data preparation is very much about usability, enabling a whole class of users that perhaps couldn't do this before to actually enable them to. So on the bottom, things like immediacy. It's got to be very dynamic, provide feedback for the users. And then obviously it has to be highly visual, and we have to have a lot of automation, so guide the user through the process. And technical expertise should not be required. So we're not talking about people who know SQL or some sort of data manipulation language or some sort of function language to do what they do. It has to be highly visual in nature. So it has to be visual, it has to be easy to use, not require a lot of expertise, and it has to automate things for the users and actually guide them through the process to be a successful data preparation tool. And of course, as you go to the top, you can see that things like machine learning certainly are important to certain constituents out there, but by and large, that's a much smaller percentage of users that require that sort of functionality. Let me ask about data integration. And I always find this interesting because it seems like the common denominator, and we'll see this on a future slide as well, the common denominator ends up being these flat file structures that live on people's laptops or PCs in the office. So access to file formats, log files, but also CSV files and Excel files are at the top of the list of data integration. And then right after that, you see the ability to combine different data. So combine data, merge data, join data, that's really important. And then third most important is, no surprise, access to traditional relational databases, whether that's SQL Server or Oracle or something else like that. So those are the top ones, and then it drops off rather sharply. But it's notable that if you look at the top there, that big data and NoSQL, although certainly important to some users, is far less important than flat files and relational database access. And then we ask about data manipulation features. In other words, which are the things that are really important? And the top of the list, really certainly the top two anyway, is being able to organize the data, basically be able to group it together into logical groups and being able to pivot it and depivot it. So basically being able to manipulate the data in a way in which you can analyze it, because many BI tools are just not really good at doing that. And it does require a good amount of preparation depending on the kind of data you're working with. For instance, we work with a lot of survey data. well, most BI tools are not especially good at dealing with survey data. You really do have to go through a fair amount of preparation and pivoting that data in order to do the analysis. And then continuing on, what are the supported outputs? So this is the other side of the coin when we talked about data integration, in other words, what's coming into the tool, and here's what we want to export it to. Once again, not a surprise to me, maybe a surprise to some of you folks out there, but certainly not a surprise to me in that the number one output is Excel and CSV, followed by relational database, and then a variety of third-party business intelligence tools that are on the marketplace. So being able to put it into their native format so that you can analyze it, hopefully in a very seamless fashion. One of the things we have seen within our community is the desire to have those things operate fairly seamlessly so that you can go from one to the other without missing a step. And next we asked about deployment, and deployment for the users doesn't resonate quite as much as some of the other features that I talked about, such as ease of use and manipulation and integration and output, but it is important certainly to some of the users. In other words, being able to automate the execution of these things. So you can see the top requirement, and some of these have changed, by the way, over time. When you look at the top requirement of being able to schedule transformation, that's a relatively recent ascent to the top requirement. And so increasingly, as people get more experienced with these capabilities, they're wanting to automate, and they're wanting to put these things into more of an operational mode where they can refresh things on a recurring basis. They can schedule things, they can refresh things. And then the next one after that is being able to monitor the transformations as they're actually executing within the environment. So those are the top two, certainly. And then, of course, being able to sample the data, that's really valuable as you're testing your logic. So increasingly, we see these tools showing up in more operational types of applications within the end user environment. And then the final thing that I want to share with you are the ratings. We always rate the vendors. Once again, these are independent and objective ratings. So we rated the vendors based on all those things we talked about: usability, integration, those output options, data manipulation, deployment, and then, of course, a total score. And so everyone is plotted on the single radar chart that you see there. Those different colors represent the different categories of functionality. And actually, I think for 4 years running now, since we started this particular survey project, Trifactive has been the top vendor. So on that note, thank you for your attention, and I'm going to turn things back over to Will for the rest of the program. Will?
Yep. Thanks, Howard. Thanks for sharing your research over the past few years, and also, we've been very, very pleased to have been ranked the top vendor for the past few years since Howard initiated research on data preparation. So if you have any questions for Howard, please enter them into the Q&A box, and we'll be addressing those at the end of the session today. So thanks again, Howard. So giving you a little background on the space, if you look at how data preparation has been done over the years, I think this first really started with coding, where you had technical individuals in your organization that were leveraging different coding frameworks, whether it was SAS or other open source frameworks, to be able to work with data, manipulate data to be used downstream for analysis. And you then see the common interface for doing this work were around mapping-based ETL frameworks. So very much IT-driven technologies that were came about within the enterprise data warehouse and business intelligence era that were focused on being able to develop and operationalize production workloads that would feed those systems. And then as the needs for data have progressed and as the rate of change has accelerated, organizations are finding that they no longer need to depend upon technical resources to be able to do the work of integrating and preparing data, that this is work that in a lot of cases, especially for analytics, would be best in the hands of business users, of analysts who have the greatest context for the data and to remove the bottleneck of only relying on a few individuals in the organization to be able to do that work. So the rise of these end user data preparation technologies, and I have a screenshot of Trifactive here on the screen, are visual. So you're able to see the context of the data through different visualizations or through a tabular interface. You're able to interact with data, as Howard was mentioning, is one of the features of these technologies, and you're able to get machine learning suggestions fed back to the user on how a user might need to prepare certain elements of the data. So you're seeing that through this evolution that the interfaces and the barriers to entry of actually getting access to raw data and preparing it are getting easier and easier for end users as technology has progressed. And I think one of the things we see quite commonly within organizations is a real need to bring upon self-service technologies, and this started really with the advance of self-service business intelligence with companies like Tableau and Qlik being very successful within the business intelligence ranks, and now that is pushing down into the data preparation space and enabling a broader set of users to be able to access, explore, clean, and prepare data for analytics with a more friendly user interface, but also with the full range of capabilities around transformation and scheduling and operationalization that they would have in those technologies. So some of the key differences, we see between traditional ETL and data integration technologies and data preparation are really around who the user is, different use cases, and the type of data that they're working with. So over the next 15 minutes, I'll be walking through each of these. So from a user perspective, when you look at ETL technologies, really designed to have IT as the user. So if you're in a large organization and you have an ETL team, an ETL instance set up, a lot of the processes that happen around analytics is that a business department has a set of requirements around a dashboard or analytics or access to data that they need to be able to work with, and then they'll list those out and then send those over to the IT team that is managing the ETL environment to have them implement them. So this back and forth within an organization may be familiar to, but a lot of the companies that we talk to, it's a very frustrating experience because the business users have the greatest context for the data, may not be able to translate what they want to see in a very understandable manner for their IT counterparts. And so these iterations around developing requirements, sending them to people that that have access to the technology but may not have the best context for the data can lead to a lot of mistakes, a lot of wasted cycles, and a lot of inefficiency. So the big difference between who the user of ETL technologies and who the user of data preparation tools is around moving the work of exploring, cleaning, preparing data from IT to the business users that have the greatest context for the data. So in order to allow analysts to be able to do this work, you got to change the interface and the workflow of how that's done. So really focused in the work that we've been doing at Trifactive around making it familiar. So if you're a user of Excel or of a visualization technology like Tableau, you're able to see the data. You're able to see how when you're developing different formulas or developing different interactions, see how that impacts the data. We've brought a lot of those techniques around visual, around exploration, around interactivity to the platform and enabling end users to see the content of their data, to understand data quality visually, to understand distribution of data visually, and then to build transformations very interactively just by selecting or dragging or clicking over different elements of the interface. And then also providing machine learning suggestions based upon anonymized usage of the platform to accelerate the processes and to guide users through the process of cleaning and preparing data. So if you bring up a data set that has a lot of data quality issues, the system will automatically represent those to the user and then recommend different ways that you might want to transform that. So enabling business users who may not have familiarity with ETL technologies and may not have familiarity with different coding frameworks to be able to do the work of data preparation that has been traditionally very mundane and very inefficient, to do that in a very visual and efficient manner. So moving on to use cases. So use case differences across the two platforms. if you look at some of the research that Gartner has presented, they're seeing data preparation platforms as key to analytics initiatives. And they even had a quote in one of their latest research pieces around by 2020, data preparation tools will be used in more than 50% of new data integration efforts for analytics. So if you look at the use cases that data preparation has been seeing a lot of success with, it is for analytics, it is for data science, it is for machine learning and automation. Probably the less focus around operational or traditional data integration workloads around data migration, around large-scale data movement, more around manipulating data, transforming data for the purposes of analytics, data science, or machine learning. And Gartner is very bullish, as I'm sure you see from what Howard has seen in his research as well, around the movement of analytics projects and the preparation work for analytics projects is moving to these data preparation tools where analysts are really the end users of the technology. So from a use case perspective, ETL within organizations that we work with is traditionally used for existing use cases that are well-defined, and they are really establishing production pipelines, so jobs that are running every hour, every 15 minutes, that they need to make sure that are hardened, run at scale, and never fail over. And so these are pipelines that are developed by IT and governed by IT. And so we see a lot of complementary aspects between ETL and data prep, because we don't want to take on existing production pipelines that are working well for your organization, that have been established, and that there's no need to disrupt. But if there are sort of new exploratory use cases where you're taking new cuts of data or new combinations of data, and you want to have your data scientists or data analysts be able to more flexibly work with that data and define new analytic outputs, then data preparation is really a great fit for that. So we have a lot of organizations that are developing center of excellence around analytics and digital transformation, and are building a center of excellence around data preparation as a way to bring in a wider range of diverse data that they can then interactively explore, manipulate, and define new analysis efforts that may go into production within a data preparation system, or then may feed into an eventual ETL pipeline once they've been established. And so one of the key aspects of data preparation is within these technologies, you can go from ad hoc exploration and iteration on results, and then push those into production within the same system if that's the way your organization wants to run it. And then the other aspect of this is that the end users are the business people, so are the people that have the greatest context for the data, that are being able to define the analysis. But then once those jobs are established and pipelines are established, that those are governed by IT. And we see that although data preparation is giving what's traditionally been an IT procedure to business people, this has to be done in collaboration with IT. So there's got to be governance around data access, security, resource allocation, scheduling, things of this nature, and that needs to be done collaboratively across business and IT counterparts, not just without IT in the mix at all. And then also, if you look at some of the decision matrix around when to use data preparation, a lot of this is around speed. So some of the benefits of data preparation technologies in allowing end users to do this work is that you're removing that iteration pipeline across groups, and you're enabling end users to do this themselves. And a lot of that adds up to efficiency. So if you're asking a question, when should we use data preparation? One of the questions should be, is time to insight really important for you? And if it's not, and if you have production pipelines that are established, then traditional ETL is for you. But if it is, then the other question should be, is this project on an ad hoc basis, or is this analysis on an ad hoc basis, or is it recurring? If it's on an ad hoc basis, then data preparation technologies are a great fit for that, because you're able to spin up a project, bring a bunch of data together, build a workflow, and then set that up in a very, very rapid fashion. Now, if they're recurring, some of the other questions are, do you have data sources that you don't have the ability to be able to control? So a lot of the customers that we work with, they are dealing with third-party data. They're dealing with data from partners. They're dealing with data that they don't inherently have control over. And so that does make it a really good fit for data preparation solutions, because they have to iteratively, every time data changes, validate that existing rules are actually in place, or to actually crack open each new data set and build a new workflow to be able to incorporate it into an analysis. So if there are workflows that you're constantly accepting customer data that you can't control, or third-party data that you can't control, or data from some sort of API that is constantly changing, that is a really good fit for data preparation technologies because of how interactive they are and able to be able to make changes to existing pipelines. Whereas if you think ETL technologies, a little bit more rigid, making any changes will take probably a much longer process within that. And if you don't have sources that are constantly changing, I think data preparation still has a lot of value, so it's still a good point to be able to promote internally within the organization. So then moving into the types of data. So I think if you look at existing data integration and ETL technologies, a lot of the data sources that they were working with were established internal repositories around different applications, whether it's ERP systems, CRMs that have defined data models, very well understood data and well understood value for the analysis. But a lot of the work that we do today across organizations is a view that kind of looks like this. You have data everywhere. It's not only in various different on-prem systems around, whether it's a Hadoop environment from Clutter or Hortonworks. It could be data warehouses, relational databases, different things of that nature. And you also have data across different cloud providers. So Amazon Web Services has obviously been a dominant vendor around S3 and Redshift. Microsoft Azure is another very popular cloud provider with Azure Data Lake Storage, HD Insight, and their SQL Data Warehouse. And Google Cloud Platform also has a variety of different cloud offerings in terms of storage, compute, and relational querying. And so a lot of the organizations that we work with in this very hybrid multi-cloud environment, have trouble being able to access data in all these different systems, and to be able to have transparent security and access controls, data lineage, and be able to integrate with different data catalogs, and also have a broad, extensible connectivity framework that is able to sort of work with all these different data sources, and to be able to do that in a very self-service fashion. So in this very heterogeneous world where you have data everywhere and you're trying to be able to integrate it, integrate it, and then push it to different systems, making sure that you have a technology such as a data preparation platform with broad connectivity is critical to getting value from these diverse data sources. So moving on in summary, and then we can jump to Q&A in a few slides. So users, users of ETL technologies going to be in your IT organization or technical resources across the team. Data preparation users going to be more analysts, business users, data scientists. We also see the emergence of the role of data engineer being a power user of data preparation technologies to access and provision data for different users to work with. From a use case perspective, ETL use cases are typically well-defined analysis, metrics, analysis that you close your books on, that the analytics you have known value, and the data that you're working with is data that you run your business on. Typically, data preparation use cases that we work on are new analysis that is typically more exploratory in nature. You're bringing together diverse data sources and trying to find out the unknown, so unknown data and unknown potential value in there, and then also allowing users to be able to build their own analysis and to bring together new combinations of data, both internal and external, to develop new sources of value or new products and services to bring value to the organization. And then the type of data that you're working with in ETL technologies, traditionally it's well understood data sources that are feeding enterprise data warehouses or BI implementations or large-scale data migration or data movement systems versus data preparation. It's going to be typically in an environment that is working with, whether it's a data lake that could be in an on-prem Hadoop environment, it could be in a cloud data lake storage system, but you're integrating a lot of diverse data that has various formats, structures, is not all highly structured or highly cleansed. It's in a very diverse, heterogeneous format. And you're trying to use the data preparation technology to tap into all those sources and define the schema of those sources on write versus the schema on read, which is traditional with ETL technologies. So with that, I'll close. My final slide is that, Trifeactive, as Howard mentioned, is one of the leaders in the data preparation market. We've been ranked the top vendor by end users and Howard Dresner in his research for the past 4 years since he kicked off research of the space. Our focus, as we mentioned in the outset, is to remove this 80% problem, to remove the challenges and inefficiencies around bringing together data prior to analysis and the work of accessing, exploring, cleaning, structuring data that takes up 80% of the end-to-end work. And the ways we go about doing that are empowering people, so that the people who know the data best, the people within lines of business that are analysts that work with the data on a day-to-day basis, to allow them to be able to do this work themselves in concert with IT around governance and things of that nature. Also to improve the efficiency of this work, not only by enabling business analysts and end users to do this work, but also providing them with a visual, machine learning-driven platform that allows them to do it more accurately and more efficiently and more quickly, so they can spend more time on generating value from the data versus doing the grunt work of cleaning it and preparing it. And then this is all needs to be done in concert with enterprise IT, so making sure that you have common governance, common security, common access controls that are well-defined across the organization. So I'm going to pass back to Bill in a second, so please feel free to throw your questions into the interface, and we'll be able to answer them in a few minutes. I also want to recommend that if you have any questions or want to get your hands on Trifactive, visit our website, trifactive.com. We do have a free product that you can download and start using right away, and get your hands on it and see for yourself if this is a good fit for you and your organization. Thanks. Take it away, Bill.
Hey, Howard, Will, thanks for that excellent presentation. So we'll get started with today's Q&A, and I want to thank the audience for their participation. We've had a lot of questions that have come in, and we'll do our best to get through all of them in the time remaining. So during this Q&A, I'm going to leave up this screen with information for Howard and Will in case you'd like to contact them following today's webinar. So let's get started. Howard, you've been looking at this market for a long time. Can you give us some comment about where you think this is going over the next 5 years? And specifically, the audience is interested in your comment about whether or not you think this is or will become a more centralized activity in organizations to ensure quality, or will it become decentralized to promote self-service?
That's a great question, Max, to whoever asked that. So I think that the penetration is still relatively slight in terms of the numbers of users that have access to it. Very often you find that there are analyst roles, and I think it could be broadened because so many people in the organization do need access to these kinds of tools and are anxious to derive insights from the underlying data. So I do think that there is still a tremendous amount of potential for expansion within this market dynamic. Will it become centralized? Well, anything's possible, right? And every organization is different, so it very much depends on their investments and their culture and their history. But I don't think that that's necessarily going to happen because there's already ETL. So within IT, they're already using a number of tools at their disposal to do batch types of transformations. And I don't view these things as mutually exclusive. IT ought to be using those kinds of tools when they are present for those batch level high volume transformations, and the users ought to be using end user data preparation tools to tailor it specifically to the kinds of analyses they want to do and to combine it with other data sets that IT may not have imagined or envisioned, or it might simply just take too long for them to get around to. So I do think the centralization of this capability is more traditional ETL. I don't think you're going to see end user data preparation go that same route, once again, because this is very much about user empowerment and end user self-service.
Well, Howard, thanks for that excellent answer. And there is a theme running through the audience questions here about whether or not this is best used by individuals or by a kind of an MDM control group. So, for example, Howard, maybe this is yours. What is the relationship between data prep platforms and data catalogs? Do they contain them? Do they integrate with them? How do you ensure that when an individual is doing their own data prep, that they are correctly interpreting the data and what they leave behind might or might not be useful for others?
So I'll take this first, Bill. This is Howard. So I do think that there is a role for both of them together. If you're going to be creating new data sets, you certainly do want to catalog those things. You want to associate keywords with them and metadata associated with them so that others can benefit. You want to share them. Conversely, you do want to have certified versions of data sources. So users ought to be able to have the freedom to create data sets that they want to create, that they need to create, but at the same time, using data catalog technology, excuse me, the organization can decide which ones are official in nature. And the user might start with an official data set, and they might decide to blend it with other data, save it and share it themselves, but that might not be the official certified version of that data set. So I think the data catalog is important because it does introduce the notion of governance and some degree of control, but it also empowers us to more readily share these kinds of data sets that we're creating.
Well, Howard, thank you for that. Go ahead, Will.
Yeah, so I can add to that. It kind of relates to the question earlier on centralization. I think data catalogs should be central to the organization. Once you have data catalogs that are specific to applications or repositories, those create data governance challenges. And I think to Howard's point, if you have a certified data set, that should be available to everyone in the organization within a common centralized catalog that is tapping into all of the repositories and all the applications. Now, although it's a challenging effort to take on, a lot of the new wave of data catalogs have a lot of machine learning and crawling capabilities that vision is actually available. And I think when people ask us, is data preparation in a siloed fashion or is it in a centralized fashion, I think it depends on the way your organization wants to operate. There should be centralized governance, metadata management, data lineage, and that should all happen in sort of this grassroots way that's happening as users are interacting with the technology. But you also should be and pushing users to a common platform that you're able to not generate another silo that is common to the organization. You have visibility into that. So I think there is a case for standalone data preparation to be a centralized activity, but the user shouldn't need to understand that. That is all managed by IT, governed by IT, and architected by IT. And then the users are just accessing data wherever they want through a common interface, such as a web browser.
Well, Will, thank you. And further to that, does Trifacta have a facility for allowing collaboration, that is multiple people working on a single data prep problem, or is it just one at a time?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we do have Git-like capabilities where you can have multiple users contributing to the same workflow within a data preparation pipeline. So you can see you have version control, you have auditing, you can understand what different users have contributed to the same workflow. You also have the ability to share data sets, to share recipes, which are assigned to an individual data set, and then end-to-end workflows that encompass numerous data sources in an end-to-end pipeline. So all of that collaboration capability is within the platform, and that is part of the process of getting more and more individuals across the organization to take part in the data preparation work and removing the bottleneck that has traditionally been led by IT doing this work themselves.
Will, thank you. And I think that this next question is probably for you as well, and that is the audience members are observing that they're already working in Excel, and they're pretty expert at that, and we know that Excel has some very advanced features like, I don't know, VLOOKUP and some of the statistical measures. Does Trifacta retain those functions when they are input? And if I were to export back to Excel, would they be retained?
Yeah, that's a good question. We do have the same functionality that Excel has in terms of building pivot tables, doing VLOOKUPs, and different things of that nature. We are working on functionality that will be able to take an existing Excel sheet that may have existing formulas within it to be able to translate those into our platform. But that is capability that's definitely a little bit down the road. What I would say is that a lot of the functionality that you have in Excel is definitely transferable to Trifacta. And I think some of the things that would differentiate from what you would do in Excel versus Trifacta is probably scale of data, one thing. So there's no scale limitations to the capacity of what your laptop can handle. I think two is just the machine learning guidance and allowing users to be able to work with data and give them guidance on what needs to be prepared, or how would you do a VLOOKUP, or how would you do sort of an aggregation on that data set. And then all of the lineage. So every step you're building within a transformation workflow is cataloged, is captured, and everyone else in the organization has a transparent view of what you're doing within the technology.
Well, thank you for that clarification. And this one is a question that you probably both want to comment on. And I know that Trifacta and data prep tools in general are pitching to a larger data analyst and even a self-service audience. But the question is about the utility for experienced data scientists. So, for example, the question is, if you are already an experienced data scientist and you're using Python and Pandas and R and the rest, is there an advantage to using a platform like Trifacta?
I can take the first part of that. I think, we have worked with a lot of data scientists, and there are data scientists that see a lot of value in Trifacta as a platform for preparing data, because it removes the need to manually develop scripts and code to prepare data. The platform automates a lot of that process. You can build complex data preparation workflows just by clicking, dragging, interacting with a platform, and using the functionality within the tool. That being said, there are times that data scientists would prefer to code their own transformation, to have that flexibility and to work within that familiar environment. So it depends on the user, but generally we see data scientists see the efficiency gains by leveraging our platform to do data preparation. And then if they have a situation where they want to be able to share that broadly with other users or other stakeholders of the organization, to be able to walk through their work instead of going over code, it's easier to go through that within a visual interface like Trifacta.
Yeah, I'll jump in here just very quickly. I mean, I see obviously a lot of the tools that are out there for data science have data prep built into them. But where organizations want to have a singular tool and leverage the knowledge that they build around that singular tool, it does make sense to, if you will, standardize around an end-user data preparation tool, not just for data science applications, but for more broadly for other business intelligence and analytical applications.
Well, that makes perfect sense, and thank you for that answer. Howard, Will, maybe both of you would want to comment on this. Going forward, will ETL and data prep remain as separate functions? Will they converge? We hear so much about platform convergence these days, and where is that convergence heading for data prep?
I'll take it first. This is Howard. So we do actually ask that question in the research, and it does tend to go back and forth. What folks generally have said is that they want it to work seamlessly with their business intelligence environment, which one could imply or infer, I should say, that they'd like it to be the same tool. That is not as much the case with ETL tools. And we've actually seen a little shift in 2018 where the respondents are saying, more so this year than last year, that they'd actually like the end-user data preparation tool to remain an independent entity.
Yeah, and I can add to that. Yeah, and so we see a lot of the data preparation functionality really focused on analytics, machine learning, data science, and enabling end users to manipulate data to feed those platforms. I think there are workloads and different data movement challenges that organizations have that are always going to fit ETL technologies, and I don't see us trying to take those on in the future.
Okay, well, thank you both. Now, Howard, you maybe have the lead insight on this, but Will, you probably do too. And that is, do you see a trend in terms of which industries are most rapidly adopting this, or what functions or use cases are leading adoption in data prep?
Well, this is Howard. I think typically it's the usual suspects. It's been the most ambitious users of business intelligence and analytics for as long as one can remember, leading with things like financial services and also things like retail and wholesale of some of the big users.
Yeah, and for us, we see, the key industries that we see are around financial services, regulatory compliance is definitely one we see quite a bit, but also risk modeling and insurance, and insurance as a category is also huge. Healthcare and pharmaceuticals around clinical trial analysis, and different data modeling that needs to do within hospitals around staffing and things like that. We've seen a lot of traction in retail, CPG, and government agencies. So those are definitely the industries and use cases that we see predominantly among our customer base.
Okay, well, thank you both for that clarification. As companies look at investing in data prep platforms and they're trying to make the decision, the financial decision, to invest or not invest, what sort of things are they looking at in terms of justifying their investment and their ROI? Are there specific cost savings, or are you focusing on quality improvements, or how do you go about measuring the value of this?
I could talk to what we've seen in our customer base. Time savings is definitely huge. We've had customers like PepsiCo, which is obviously a multinational global organization. They've seen reduction in data preparation time and overall end-to-end analytics time cut down by 80 to 90%. So that time savings is a huge value to them, and then that leads to larger cost savings as well. We've also seen organizations uncover data quality challenges that have saved them multiples of millions of dollars with an analysis around, some sort of variable in calculating risk or some sort of shipment that it went awry. So data quality is also a huge benefit. Also, which is more of a traditional IT measure, is replacing existing methodologies and systems for doing this. So we've had a lot of organizations that have leveraged SaaS or large scale or sort of legacy technology to do data preparation, and those have built up over time with licenses and servers and growing costs. And so a lot of the times when they switch to a modern architecture and a modern technology, an approach like Trifeactive for data preparation, they actually end up with a lot of cost savings around technology costs, which has also been a great benefit, especially if you're an IT administrator that's implementing this technology.
Will, thank you. Howard, anything to add?
I would just concur that it's really about time savings and improving the productivity of the user in preparing the data, because as I said earlier, many users are preparing the data using whatever is at hand. So very often that ends up being a spreadsheet, which is not especially well suited for the purpose. And these tools certainly improve the productivity and get the users out of preparing the data and analyzing the data, which inevitably has an obvious benefit to the organization. So being able to, on something like that, you can calculate a return on investment. Some things ROI doesn't work very well, but when you know what it takes for the user to get involved or to prepare the data, and you compare that after using an end-user data prep tool, you can actually assign a value to that.
Well, Howard, Will, hey, thank you for some great answers to some very good questions. And for those of you that asked questions that weren't answered today, we'll be sending all the unanswered questions to Howard and Will and the Trifactive team so they can follow up with you after today's webinar. Now, I have just a few quick announcements. If you'd please mark your calendars for April 17th, and that's our next DSC webinar, which will be Self-Service Analytics, Fostering a Data-Enabled Culture, to be presented by Alteryx. Also remember that today's taping will be available for on-demand viewing later today, and you can find that on the homepage of datasciencecentral.com in the webinar tab located at the top of the page. Well, this brings today's webinar to a close, and I'd like to thank our audience for their attendance and thoughtful questions. A special thanks to Trifactive for their sponsorship, and especially for our speakers today, Howard Dresner and Will Davis, for their insight into today's topic. This is Bill Voorhees. I'm very pleased to have been your host for today's event. I look forward to seeing you all again on April 17th. Have a great day.